Butterflies return someday.
Welcome back. Today I want to address something that's been weighing on my heart. I've noticed a pattern when we talk about sexual violence in our communities. Now, I'm grateful that we're speaking openly about sexual violence. But I hope that we keep in mind that many of us, most of us, are still at a place where we're learning and unlearning the most helpful and healthy ways to speak about sexual violence, and to remind ourselves we are not anywhere near there yet. So, with that humbleness in mind, it's when people say things like, my family member was raped, or I was assaulted as a child, but it wasn't this type of person. It wasn't that type of person. Instead, you know who it was? It was. And they insert someone they want to make a point about. Maybe a preacher. Maybe a teacher. Maybe a stepfather. And see, that's the key, is someone they want to make a point about. But it's couched in concern. It's framed in concern for victims. But it's not true concern for victims. It's actually you trying to make a point. And that's not healthy. That's not freeing for victims. Now, on the surface, it might seem like the person saying this is exposing a truth, the truth. They're pulling back the veil on people who society says can commit harm, and thereby making things safer for people. But let's talk about how this narrative can actually silence survivors and minimize the trauma they've experienced. When we say it wasn't this kind of person, it was that kind, we're making assumptions about who is or isn't capable of violence. We're framing sexual violence as something that happens only under very specific conditions. A certain shadowy stranger, a man in a dark alley, someone who fits society's idea of danger. And you may say, well, a preacher doesn't fit that. To some people it does. Or a teacher doesn't fit that. To some people it does. And it's more helpful to leave this space open, because the truth is, it could be anyone. And the empowering thing is to let victims speak and let victims tell you, this person has harmed me. You may not have thought of this person as someone capable of harming me, but I'm speaking today, and I am telling you that this person that you may not have previously thought of capable of harming anyone, as people like to say, wouldn't harm a fly. This person harmed me. The truth is, violence wears many faces, and it doesn't conform to current societal categories. And that's on my heart because I spent so many years, some of that time on a hotline, an online hotline. And what was groundbreaking about it at that time, and I don't know if it still is, but at that time, because young people had a tendency to hop on that hotline, and young people would tap in, and you're the crisis person on an online hotline for people who want to tell you their deepest secrets about sexual violence. And so young people are hopping on and they're telling you, you know, my mom's in the next room, my dad's in the next room, my grandmother's in the next room. But I feel better talking to a stranger about this, because I don't think that they would believe me if I told them who this person was, who has been harming me, and who, when I see them tomorrow, will try to harm me again. People won't believe me. People won't believe me. Wow. The reality is, sexual violence is often perpetrated, yes, by people we know, people we trust. And let me add, because we forget, people we're simply, especially as kids, people we're just kind of familiar with. We're not really, because kids don't really know people, and I think we forget that kids don't really know some people. Some people they encounter, they're familiar with. They don't know. I mean, it's not really, kids know certain things about adults or older children, but they don't know. And as a child survivor, I can tell you this. Some of the things you don't process about that person. I was violated. One of the people who violated me was a child who was in foster care. Now, I was familiar with that information. I knew that information. There's so many things I knew about about this child at the time, child, and I was a child. But I had no way of knowing, like I know now as an adult, what that meant for him. And unfortunately, what that meant for me at the time. So kids are, I like to say they're familiar, because people often forget that kids are just kids. Kids are just kids. They know some things, but they don't know, it's a range of things that you won't process until you're much older. And like I said, so keeping that in mind, that kids are familiar, family members, neighbors, community leaders, and yes, religious figures. But when you say things like, it was this person, as if that's more shocking than the fact that it happened, like the person who did it is more shocking, their role, who we think they are, is more shocking than the fact that, you know what, dang on it, somebody harmed me. Somebody harmed me. It reinforces the idea that it's not the act itself that's appalling. You know what's appalling? It's who did it. And that is not, as a survivor and as one who has talked to survivors for 30 years now, over 30 years. That's not most people's main concern. And I've talked to folks from children to elderly. It's not our concern. The concern is, doggone it, this happened to me. And these are the things, this is the aftermath that I have to deal with. That at any given time, I may have to deal with some nightmares, life happens. Some things happen that are unsettling in everyone's life. And for some of us, that may mean things that we have to revisit. We may have to go to the doctor. And now we have to figure out, placements for how do I put this thing, not let this thing that happened to me interfere now with the fact that I really need to go to these life-saving appointments and have these people do these things and touch me and this, that, and the other. And how do I deal with that? And it doesn't come to the forefront of my mind, I promise you. The people, the roles they played, the who people thought they were, that's not it. That's so not it. What comes to my mind is, dang it, here it is one more time. I got to deal with this. And how do I do that? And so now I have to call in friends, family. I pray. I turn to, for me, I turn to, my spiritual readings. I might get into my creativity. I might, in all kinds of things, exercising, dancing, all those things that help me to maybe deal with something that I have to deal with in real life. And now what I've experienced, because it's still kind of, the residue is still kind of there. And so let's figure out where we're going to put this so that I can sojourn and continue on and persevere and be great. So when people say, well, it wasn't this person, it was that person, isn't that shocking? It shifts the conversation away from the survivor. And like I said in the beginning, we're not there yet. We're not there yet. We can't let our egos, those human egos, we can't let our egos say, you know what, we had this Me Too movement, so we're so savvy now. We're great. We're talking about it. Look at us. We're great. Look at us. We're talking about it in the open. Aren't we proud of ourselves? We're not there. We're nowhere near there. We're not listening yet to what the shift of the conversation has gotten away from survivors, away from their pain, away from their truths, away from what happened when you were going through this, what happened when you spoke your truth, away from their need for healing and what their needs are. This conversation is centering, as it always has, the perpetrator. It is distracting from the core issue. A person was violated. Usually, nearly always, someone who was vulnerable was violated. Someone's life was at least temporarily shattered. It's definitely changed, because what we know scientifically is that trauma changes the brain. And that needs to be our focus. That needs to be our focus. Healing, changing, helping, supporting. I've sat with countless survivors. I was telling someone I had the opportunity, I've had some wonderful opportunities over the span of my career. Wonderful. And I'm grateful because each person teaches you and grows you. And I had the opportunity to, usually in my capacity as an advocate or an activist, when people come to you, you're solving something. You might be finding housing, finding therapists, getting protective orders, or getting into shelter, or facilitating support groups, or securing funding. You're doing something. I had this one position, and I crisscrossed the state. And the position, I tell you, it was the hardest, because what I found is the hardest thing to do is to listen. And I had no idea. This was way deep into the career, and I had no idea that the hardest thing to do is simply to listen and not be solving things, not be resourcing people. My job was to go and listen for a federal project with University of Maryland and Maryland Coalition Against Sexual Assault and the federal government, and just listen to people's account of what happened, what their needs were, how people responded, and what they need now. What are their recommendations? And it's like, we're going to sit here and we're just going to listen to you. Some of those went on for 4 to 6 hours. And it was so exhausting. So exhausting. I told someone about the time I went into my director's conference room. I went into her office and there was a conference table in there. And I went in there, and just like a child, I put my head on the desk like you do when you're a kid. And I was just so exhausted. And I just said, I'm wiped out. Oh my gosh. All I'm doing is listening. How is it that I don't have to help people get protective orders? I don't have to help people get safe. I don't have to help people find, emergency hotels so he won't find you. And then let's move you. And then, let's get you in the middle of the night. Let's get you on a train. Literally. Had to get somebody on a train and get you, and your daughter down there to Texas real quick. I didn't have to do any of that. And she said to me that when she was in grad school, the hardest thing to do is to sit with another person's pain and just sit with it, not solve it, not do anything, just sit. And my goodness, she ain't never lied, because that was truly all my career. I'd worked with people with disabilities, and I was a case manager, and I did this, and I reached out, and this time I sat with women from all walks of life. All walks of life. And I want to tell you, man. Ooh. So I sat with countless survivors who struggle to be heard, because the person who hurt them didn't fit the stereotype of an abuser. They were told, that doesn't sound like him. Or I just can't believe that he would do something like that. I talked to one brave, fierce woman. She had served in the military. And she talked to me about being a little girl and telling the family. She was so brave to tell her family what was going on. And her grandmother assaulting her and calling her a liar because her son wouldn't do that. And as I'm talking to her, I'm looking at this beautiful, courageous woman, very tall, statuesque. And I now can see the beginnings when she erected what I saw in her. That you could almost call it, I hate this word, but because people, I hate this word, it's guarded. You could see when she erected that fence was probably that day. If I had to guess, I would guess it was that day. It was that day. It was that day. The day that little girl was brave enough to stand before an entire family, her family, and confess, and, well, not confess, because she didn't have a doggone thing to confess. But to say, to bring that, to escort that truth forward and say, listen, my father has been harming me. And to get attacked, and she said it was like out of nowhere. Physically attacked. So understand that you don't even know what folks are going through. That's not my story. Fortunately, I was believed. That's not my story. It's not my story, but I've heard untold stories of different terrible reactions that people had to deal with in their time that they were brave enough. From children, little children, on to elderly. Believe it or not. And the way that people responded to them. Again, that doesn't sound like him. Or their mind tells them, well, wait a minute, this doesn't usually happen. This isn't the way this usually goes. You know us human beings, we like patterns. This doesn't usually happen. So I hope you'll think about that when you're saying things like, it was not of this. Who are you? Are you trying to help victims? Or are you doing a campaign right now? Because what you're not doing is freeing victims and opening up windows and doors and just making people free to speak their truth, the truth of what happened and who's harming them. So those doubts, that hesitation, all of that, like I said about that what I saw, that creates even deeper wounds. In fact, it was on this study. I would go back to the office. There were 2 of us on this study. And we would go back, and often, because this stuff was heavy, we would go back and we would process with the rest of the staff who were also specialists in sexual violence. And they were so cool. They would listen, And so we would process things with them, and and some of the most, I'd say, some of the best outcomes that we saw. I remember one woman in particular. The best outcome that I saw was with a woman who told me that when she told, her father treated it as, this was an attack on all of us. But not in that, not in that brutish kind of, way. That understandable way that men can do when, someone violates someone they care about. But in that, very kind, what do you need me to do? But you are not in this alone. I see what happened to you as an attack on us all. And whatever you need, we're going to do. So she was into Reiki and all these alternative healing methods, and she'd go to therapy and all of this. Her father drove her there, picked her up, And it was just, it wasn't, hey, we're going to go and we're going to go after, you know how folks do in conflict and war, like we're just going to go take everybody out. It wasn't that. It was more, what do you need to heal? Again, see, centering the survivor. What do you need from us? This was an attack on all of us. What do you need from all of us? All of our energy is now going to go into healing the family of this treachery, this attack that happened to us. And I want to tell you, she came to me by way of her therapist. And she was a joyful soul in healing. Not perfect, not undamaged, not untouched, not unviolated, but in progress, and not alone, supported, loved, held up, first by her father, and everyone else was following that lead. And that was the most, I went straight back to when I got back to the office, I remember going and speaking about her, and just like, wow. Because it was different. It was not, listen, when people had come to me before, it's dire, it's desperate, it's crisis. And that's not the way she was, genuinely. She was genuine. She knew that she needed healing, and she was doing just that in multiple ways. But definitely she was in a state of joy, and it was very different for me. And I remember going back to the office and talking to them about that, like, wow, I didn't realize that, this this was a moment of growth for me. So going back to what we're still talking about the same thing, but we can't continue to minimize the violence by focusing on the who instead of the what. Because we're silencing survivors. We're telling them that their experience is only valid if it matches what we think violence looks like. And isn't that, what survivors have been fighting against the whole time? It's like you almost feel like, oh my goodness, we're back to one again. We tell you what it looks like. You don't tell us. We tell you. And then we need you to back us up. Much like this great father did. She told them. She courageously brought that secret to the light. This young lady, she's very young, and her father had her back in the way she needed him to have it. Whew. And let's be real. Sexual violence doesn't care about titles or reputations. A person's position in community doesn't make their harm less real. In fact, it often makes it harder for the survivor to come forward. Why? Because power protects itself. Power protects itself in families. That means if John is the favorite in the family, or Grandma deems John as the one who's going to be protected, John's going to be protected. If the teachers decide that they're going to come together and they're going to protect, that teacher's going to be protected. If and on and on and on. Authority figures, whether they're preachers, teachers, leaders, or folks in the family, or whomever, often use their power to keep survivors quiet, to maintain their image, even in families, to maintain their image, to ensure that their narrative is heard over the survivor's truth. That's what Grandma, that was a terrible move to attack her granddaughter. Yes, she loves her son. But that act right there was her trying to ensure and protect her narrative, what she believes and thinks about her child, and not listening to anything else that anyone else has to say, not listening to this child and trying to at least, I didn't say that you have to believe it right off, which some people have a problem with. What I said, there are people who do, and I hope that's the parents. But if Grandma wants to gather some details and gather some facts, she can do that. But she doesn't have a right to attack this child. Go on and grab your details. Go on and do your sleuthing and all of that. But to do that is horrific. And that will never leave that woman. That's shameful. So when we hear stories that begin with, it wasn't who you thought it was this person, we need to stop and ask ourselves, are we more shocked by who did it? Or can you please, let's look at the fact that someone was hurt. Can you imagine in the middle of somewhere, I've been somewhere and people have passed out, or have you ever been somewhere and someone's been assaulted, attacked, someone starts bleeding? The first thing that you do, the first thing you don't want to do is turn around and go, hey, isn't it shocking that this person did that? No. We want to look at, we want to administer aid to the person who is suffering. Can we do that? Please. Because it's not about the who. It's about the harm, the trauma, the destruction left behind in the survivor's life. And we've not even yet begun to do enough about that. Not even. We need to shift our language and our focus. When a survivor speaks out, the first words out of our mouths should not be about who we think would or wouldn't do such a thing. That's how we get into this mess with when celebrities come out and all this other kind of stuff. See, it's not about that. Because I have said, and wherever there are people, there's a potential for violence and abuse. And people are like, no. And see, that's your problem. Wherever there are people, there's a potential for this. Where there's people. And that's how you can get on these crisis calls. And that's how you can encounter folks. And not be like, oh my gosh, that person. That's how you keep it steady. Because you're not shocked. It's a person, isn't it? So our first priority is to believe them, to listen, and to support them in their healing. Like I said, when I said believe them, I do understand. People like to talk about false and this and that. By the way, that's usually about 1 or 2% of folk. And we can deal with that. And I have no problem at all dealing with that. But when I say believe them, often I'm talking to parents, I'm talking to friends, I'm talking to loved ones. Because what I say to people is, if someone is saying something like that, you know they need support, right? You're close to them, they need support. Our first priority is to believe them, to listen, and to support them in their healing. Because no one's position, no one's title, I don't care. No one's role, no one's gender, no one's sex, no one's faith, no one's anything should ever excuse the trauma they've caused. And let us set about continuing to listen and steady ourselves for truths yet to unfold from survivors of violence and abuse, because we've yet to hear them. I promise you. I've done this so long, and oh my goodness, I'm still hearing. I'm still hearing. I'm still hearing. I'm still hearing. Keep listening. And don't assume that I won't even call it post me too, because ain't no such a thing, I think. Just because we've started to have this conversation doesn't mean that we're at the end of it and we know things. We're still in the process of listening and hearing and helping and supporting people in their healing. So let's make sure. That's what we can do. What can we do? That's what we can do. Let's make sure that we stop minimizing. We stop. Because that's an action. Silencing is a verb. It's an action. Let's stop silencing. And let's start centering the voices of survivors where they belong. We can do that. That much we can do. That doesn't even cost any money. We can do that. It's not too expensive. Whew. All right, let me be out. Listen, as always, I'm Tonya GJ Prince reminding you, believe survivors, believe in healing, and please believe in our power, our collective power, our individual power to make great change. All right. Y'all be great, because it's in you. Be great. All right. Thanks for listening. This is Tonya GJ Prince. Thanks for listening. Y'all be great.